Things you stop caring about after 60. At 30, you were exhausted trying to impress people who weren't even watching. At 45, you were still apologizing for things that weren't your fault. You were managing your image, running someone else's timeline, shrinking yourself in rooms where you deserve to take up space. But somewhere after 60, something extraordinary happens. You stop. And that's not giving up. That's not defeat. That's the most powerful psychological upgrade a human being ever receives. And today we're going to talk about exactly what gets left behind and why losing it is the greatest gain of your life. We've been sold a lie about aging. The story goes you lose things, your energy, your relevance, your edge. But research tells a completely different story. Stanford's Center on Longevity has spent decades studying what actually happens to the human brain after 60. And what they found is striking. Older adults become measurably better at filtering out emotional noise. The brain doesn't deteriorate in the ways we fear. It optimizes. It starts cutting what doesn't matter with surgical precision. Psychologists call this the positivity effect. The aging brain literally rewires itself to prioritize emotional stability over social performance. It stops chasing approval and starts protecting peace. So everything we're about to discuss isn't weakness. It isn't resignation. It's your nervous system finally working for you instead of against you. Think about how much energy you have spent, over an entire lifetime, managing what other people think of you. The outfit reconsidered 3 times before leaving the house. The comment you replayed for a week. The version of yourself you performed at dinner parties and job interviews on social media. Psychologists have a name for this mechanism. It's called the sociometer, an internal gauge your brain runs constantly, measuring your standing in the eyes of others. For most of your life, that gauge controlled you more than you ever knew. But a 2023 study from the University of Michigan found that social self-confidence peaks in the early 60s, not youth. People in their 60s showed the least sensitivity to social rejection of any adult age group tested. What changes? Time. When you have infinite runway ahead, other people's opinions feel like urgent data. When you've lived enough to see that most of what people thought about you was wrong or forgotten or completely made up, the sociometer loses its grip. After 60, people stop dressing for the room and start dressing for themselves. They stop editing their sentences before they speak. They say non-nos without a 3-paragraph explanation. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens. And when it does, the silence where the anxiety used to be is astonishing. Here's one nobody talks about honestly. After 60, people start ending relationships. Quietly, without drama, without a big confrontation, they simply stop making the effort. And the relationship dissolves. Not because they become cold, because they become clear. There's a landmark theory in psychology called socio-emotional selectivity theory, developed by Dr. Laura Carstensen at Stanford. Her research shows that as people perceive their time horizon as shorter, they radically restructure their social priorities. They move away from large networks and surface-level connections and move toward fewer, deeper, genuinely meaningful relationships. In plain language, when time feels finite, you stop wasting it on people who drain you. The 35-year friendship that was held together by geography and habit, and never actually by joy, gets quietly released. The family member whose presence always costs you 3 days of recovery gets seen less. Not with hatred, with clarity. What people describe on the other side of this is not loneliness, it's relief. A smaller circle that's entirely real. Conversations that don't require recovery. Relationships where you don't perform, you simply are. That is not isolation. That is one of the quiet luxuries of having lived long enough to know the difference. The economist Thorstein Veblen coined the term conspicuous consumption over a century ago. The idea, humans buy things not just for utility, but to signal status to others. And for most of adulthood, that drive is relentless. The kitchen renovation that was really about the dinner party story. The car chosen partly for how it would look in the driveway. The vacation photographed more than experienced. Decades of spending emotional and financial energy on an audience that was largely imaginary. After 60, something shifts in the reward circuitry. Retirement psychology research consistently shows that people in their 60s report lower financial anxiety than people in their 40s, despite often having less active income. The reason isn't just financial security, it's that desire itself contracts. The neighbor's new car produces no cortisol. The grandchild's laugh produces everything. People describe this shift as moving from accumulation mode to meaning mode. The math of what constitutes a good day changes completely. A long walk, a real conversation, a meal cooked slowly. None of those cost much. All of them, it turns out, were what they were working toward the whole time. For decades, the perfectionist in you ran the show. The email rewritten 11 times, the presentation rehearsed until it became robotic, the creative project that never launched because it wasn't ready, the phone call mentally scripted before dialing. Perfectionism is rooted in early shame, the learned belief that your value is conditional on your performance. It is exhausting, and it is, quietly, the enemy of a fully lived life. But here's what accumulated failure actually does to a person. After enough years, you have failed publicly. You've been rejected, embarrassed, wrong, and overlooked. And you've noticed something crucial. It didn't kill you. In fact, your best stories are your failure stories. The ones that made the room laugh, the ones that taught you something, the ones you actually remember. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, the well-documented phenomenon where navigating hardship builds what researchers call narrative confidence. You stop fearing failure because you have evidence, personal and irrefutable, that you survived it. After 60, people pick up hobbies without needing to be good at them. They paint badly and enjoy it. They sing off-key and don't stop. They say the imperfect thing instead of staying silent. The tyranny of the internal critic doesn't vanish, but it loses its authority. And that is freedom of a very specific, very hard-won kind. How are you? I'm fine. For how many years did you perform that exchange on autopilot? At work, at family dinners, in marriages, while carrying something completely different underneath. Emotional suppression is one of the most normalized behaviors in adult life, particularly for men, but universal in professional and social spaces. The cultural message is clear. Manage your presentation. Keep it together. Don't burden people. The research is equally clear about the cost. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's landmark work demonstrated that the body stores what the mind refuses to process. Suppressed emotional experience doesn't disappear. It accumulates. In the form of chronic tension, disrupted sleep, relational distance, and a pervasive sense of living slightly outside your own life. After 60, the performance becomes too expensive to maintain. People start therapy they deferred for 30 years. They have the difficult conversations they rehearsed and avoided across entire decades. They say, "I'm not okay," to someone who deserved the truth years earlier, and the data supports what these people already feel. The American Psychological Association's longitudinal research on aging consistently shows emotional authenticity as one of the strongest predictors of well-being in adults over 60. Not happiness, not health, not wealth, authenticity. The willingness to be seen as you actually are turns out to be the foundation everything else was supposed to be built on. Here is the most counterintuitive thing on this entire list. After 60, many people become significantly less afraid of death. This runs against everything we assume. Surely the closer you are to something, the more it frightens you. But the psychology tells a different story entirely. Terror management theory explains that much of human behavior, the status chasing, the legacy building, the busyness, is driven by an unconscious attempt to manage death anxiety. Younger people construct elaborate psychological defenses to avoid sitting with mortality. It hums underneath almost every major life decision. But lived experience quietly dismantles those defenses. Erik Erikson, in his final stage of human development, described the task of late life as achieving ego integrity, a sense that your life, with all its detours and losses, was meaningfully yours. People who reach that integration don't find death terrifying. They find it contextual, and context changes everything. When death stops being an emergency exit to panic about and becomes simply the frame around the painting, life sharpens. People take the trip they kept postponing. They say, "I love you," without waiting for the right moment. They forgive faster, not for the other person, but because carrying old grievances feels like a waste of whatever time is left. This is not resignation. This is arguably the most alive a person ever becomes. So let's put it plainly. When you stop caring about other people's opinions, what's left is your own voice. When you stop maintaining toxic relationships, what's left are the real ones. When you stop keeping up, what's left is what you actually wanted all along. When you stop being a perfectionist, what's left is the creative, imperfect, fully human version of you that was always more interesting than the polished one. When you stop pretending, what's left is intimacy, real intimacy, perhaps for the first time. When you stop fearing death, what's left is the present moment, vivid and sufficient. Economists David Blanchflower and Andrew Oswald studied happiness across the human lifespan in over 130 countries and found the same shape everywhere, a U-curve. Happiness is high in youth, drops through midlife, and rises again measurably consistently after 60. Not because life gets easier, because people get clearer. And here's the final thing worth saying. None of this has to wait until 60. These aren't gifts that arrive automatically with age. They are realizations that can arrive with age, or they can arrive right now. If you're willing to ask the same questions that 6 decades of living eventually forces, what are you carrying that was never yours to carry? Who are you performing for who isn't even watching? What would today look like if you stopped managing your image long enough to actually live? The goal was never to care about everything. The goal was always to finally care about the right things.